to jump in. I want this to be as interactive as possible. Okay. So in terms of the agenda of what I'll be covering today, I know that there are people here from different backgrounds, some from IT, some from security, some from legal, some from marketing. So what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm going to go over the initial introduction on what privacy is at a very high level and basically what the GDPR is, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Okay. Then I'll go over some of the specific terminology and requirements of the ePrivacy regulation. And lastly, I'll wrap up by going over what sort of operational consideration that we need to have when you're looking at complying with ePrivacy regulation. So in terms of how you're going to manage all the cookies, how you're going to categorize these in different purposes, what consent actually means, how do you actually collect the consent. So I'm going to touch on all of that.
ePrivacy, is that the same as GDPR or is it different?
It's different. Okay. So the question here was, is ePrivacy regulation, ePrivacy directive, and the GDPR the same or not? It's not. So ePrivacy directive is currently it's not even a law, it's a directive on how you should process electronic communication. Whether you're allowed to access someone's computer, such as cookies, and that's going to slowly change into ePrivacy regulation, which becomes a law commonly enforced by all the EU entities. But there's a big overlap with GDPR as well, because it's all related to privacy. And what the GDPR adds to the ePrivacy directive is that it makes the concept of consent a lot more defined. And I will go into what a valid consent actually entails during my presentation today. Okay. So in terms of privacy, what is privacy? And what is personal data? So let me just start by asking you guys over here, what is personal data in your mind?
Personal data, age, gender, address, phone number.
Okay, so the answer here was name, age, gender, phone number. Those are all correct. But are there any other kind of personal data that you know about? Would the fact that I like wearing blue shirts be personal data? Right?
Yes.
Good, right?
Yes.
With the fact that I am Sikh, personal data?
Yes.
It is personal data, and it's also a sensitive personal data. It's a whole different category of personal data. So within the GDPR, Article 4.1, you guys all have the GDPR books with you guys as well. It's a very good read, especially if you have insomnia. Right, so in terms of what personal data is, it's defined in the GDPR as any information that relates to either an identified or identifiable natural person. So if that data can somehow, either directly or indirectly, basically point out a single individual, that's considered personal data. So what this means is that if I have anonymized data or pseudonymized data, that's not really personal data, as long as the anonymization mechanism and pseudonymization mechanism is done in such a way that it's not reversible. So if I have a lot of aggregated data in a large group of people, so if I'm looking at income ranges, right? So rather than saying I know that someone's making 100,000 baht, if I say that the range is about 50,000 to 500,000 baht, then that can help you with pseudonymizing that data. But you also have to be careful, because if you go too far in the range, if I say someone's earning 1 million baht, there's only a few people in the world that is earning 1 million baht, and that can be constituted as personal data as well. Okay. So it has to be directly or indirectly. So indirectly meaning if I start combining 5 or 6 different pieces of information together, that becomes personal data as well. So in practice, what this means is that almost every single piece of information you carry in your organization is personal data. Okay. The other question that I wanted to ask was, what do you guys think processing data means? The way you collect data, that's good. What else? What else constitutes as processing data?
Use the
Analyze data.
yeah.
analyze data. So it is literally anything you do with the data, starting from collection, recording, erasing, restricting. So everything constitutes personal data and processing personal data. Okay. So the reason why I'm defining these two pieces is that not everybody realizes that the data that they're processing is personal data. Not everybody realizes that they actually are processing personal data. Okay, so one of the first steps that a company would do when they're trying to walk towards the compliance of any sort of privacy regulation doesn't have to be GDPR. So today I might be talking about GDPR, but that's just because that's the latest in thing. But the GDPR has set precedents to all the countries in the world to set up their own privacy laws. So countries like Brazil just passed a new one, California passed a new one, India, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. So everybody in this region has their own privacy act. And the essence of all of these things is the same.
So this GDPR is this World Organization body association or just standards?
The GDPR is the European privacy regulation. So before the GDPR, there was some other directive in place where it was kind of very flexible for each member state in the EU to choose how they're going to implement each of these. The enforcement action was on the EU member states. That meant that certain countries were more strict, certain were not as strict. With the GDPR, it's now become a blanket law across the EU. And more importantly, there are extraterritorial reaches, meaning that it impacts not just companies that are working in the EU, it's companies that may do business with the EU. It impacts any company that targets EU residents. So residents is the key, not citizens. Meaning if I'm Sasin and I'm trying to attract some Thai citizens working abroad to come do an MBA course over here, that falls under the GDPR as well. Okay?
And not like America has their own GDPR.
So they have their own privacy act. There is no proper federal act yet. That's in progress. So now it's enforced by each state. So California has passed one that is almost equivalent to the GDPR. I believe it was Arizona or Colorado that has another one that's about to be released as well. So countries and states are catching up. Okay. Now, what is privacy? Right. So if you really break it down, privacy is basically a human issue. It's an individual issue. So it's about the respect that you give individuals, whether these individuals could be your employees, could be your customers, could be your contractors, could be anybody, right? Now, most companies in the world are familiar with the concept of security. So security is a technical challenge. It's about making sure that the data that you have within your organization stays secure. So security involves both personal data and non-personal data. Where non-personal data could be things like your IP, your finances, your company's finances. Whereas personal data is the actual data that your customers and so on. Privacy is solely a personal data issue. But there is a lot of overlaps between the world of privacy and the world of security as well. So for example, the concept of the CIA triad. So in the world of security, one of the basic tenets of security is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that same concept also shows up in the world of privacy as well. So if you're familiar with the world of security, a lot of the concepts are there, but there's also a lot of other things that start flowing in when you're starting to implement a proper privacy program in your company. So being able to figure out that whether your products that you're designing is built on the principles of privacy by design, privacy by default. So privacy by design is basically making sure that when you're designing any sort of product or service within your company, you think about privacy first, rather than think of it as a later thought that you just put some plaster on to fix the issue. Privacy by default means, let's say you're using Facebook, for example. if they're really going by privacy by default concept, then every single setting within the application should have everything, the strictest privacy settings first, and then you let your end users release some of the security features. Okay, so these are two basic concepts that the world of privacy is trying to push to all organizations worldwide. Okay. So there are lots of different things between the world of privacy management and information security, but it also overlaps. Now, in fact, there's actually articles 32 to 34 within the GDPR that relates directly to security requirements. But the GDPR is about 99 different articles, so security is a small part of it, but important part. Because you can't have privacy without security. Like if I have my national ID number in your database and there's no password encryption, everything's stored in plain text, that's not going to be private at all. Any questions at this point?
So far, so good.
Anyone else? Alright, so what this means is that GDPR and the latest updates for all the privacy regulations around the world is now more than just a policy update. It actually requires proper operational reform within an organization to be able to comply with this, right? So in order to really comply with this, and if you do it right, you'll be having constant interaction with the IT team, with the legal team. You might have your own dedicated privacy officer, or you might outsource that. And you will have your marketing team. And all these teams will have constant collaboration. Your data protection officer, or whoever is in charge of privacy, should have an independent route towards top management, so that they're able to actually enforce a lot of the actions without being interfered with by other parties. Okay. And then the other part here that's important, especially for companies outside Europe, is that it's not only the people collecting personal data, this company that processes personal data as well, that needs to be compliant to all these regulations. Meaning, if you have a contract with a company in Europe to help do some back-end services for them, you also rely on that. Okay? So here are some examples of operational tasks that a company would have to do to start complying with privacy laws. Now,
Sorry, when has this been set up?
great question. So the question was, when did the GDPR come into effect? So the basic text and the basic law passed 2 years ago. And companies around the world had a grace period of 2 years to get their act together, get all the pieces together. Most companies started worrying about it 2 months before the deadline, which came on May 25th. Right? So the week before the deadline came in, I was on the phone all day. So yeah, companies have had 2 years to prepare. Not everyone prepared for it, and now, but it's important to remember that it's not a destination that you reach. It's something that you will have to keep doing. It's an ongoing process. Okay, so regardless of whether you made that May 25th deadline or not, it's still something that's relevant as you move forward. Okay, so here are some examples of tasks that are out there. So the IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, have released 2 really good articles about the operational impacts and the operational responses to the GDPR. So that's something that I would encourage you to read if you are not familiar with what needs to be done from a company perspective. Okay. Now, this particular slide is important because with the privacy regulation, it's not just about complying with the law anymore. There's a huge focus on the concept of accountability, where as an organization, if you're processing someone's personal data, you're accountable for it. So it's up to you, the burden of proof is on the organization to prove that they're actually complying with it. So it's a double-edged sword, where not only you have to put in the time and resources to comply, you need to have those proof, those compliance, so that if the regulators do ever come knocking on your door, you're able to easily show that, okay, these are all the things that I've done. And if there's some sort of business activity that you're doing where it's potentially a high-risk activity, there's a question on whether processing this personal data is lawful, then you should be able to show your internal train of thought on why you're processing this personal data and what sort of risk mitigation steps you put in place.
Sorry to ask you this GDPR, independent government, which ministry is responsible for GDPR?
So the question here is, within a government, which ministry is responsible for personal data, for the GDPR? So in Europe, they actually have a whole separate European Data Protection Board that have been set up to enforce and to create all the different policies. There's actually 3 different EU organizations. There's a parliament that sets the rules and something. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head the answer to that, but it was part of one of the exams I had to take. Okay. Any other questions? Fine. So for the newcomers, what I'm doing right now is I'm basically going over a quick overview on what privacy is, the basics of the world of privacy, and then after that I'll be going to the ePrivacy regulations. So right now, just going over what constitutes personal data, what constitutes processing data, and then accountability is a big concept that comes in with a lot of regulations, because you're supposed to not only comply with all the pieces, but you need to be able to demonstrate that compliance. Okay. Now, during the road up to the GDPR, people were all worried about the fines. Like, well, there's a 2% fine, there's a 4% fine. But the GDPR is not really about the fines. Okay. So, yes, the fine is there as the stick, but they do have a carrot available for you to encourage yourself to comply as well. So yes, a lot of organizations, a lot of the data protection authorities, they would start off by giving a warning or a reprimand. Okay. Now, unless you deliberately do not follow the data subject's rights, you deliberately don't do anything at all, then yes, you'll be subjected to that. But if you have put into place proper systems, proper privacy program, and if you do get breached, if you do get hacked, chances are they're going to be lenient with you, especially if you put in all that procedures in place. Because there's no such thing as 100% security. That doesn't exist. So you need to make sure that you're putting in a proper effort, go by the spirit of the law, and then you might just be let off by warnings and reprimands.
So who imposes the fine?
So it will be the European Union, the Data Protection Board. Now, a big question that companies outside the EU will have is, can they really find us, right? And there's no real black and white answer to that. Joey might have a different answer for this piece, but from what I've read up and know, they might not be able to enforce the fine directly on every single organization. So if your company has actual presence in the EU, yes, they can potentially fine your EU entities, but for companies like, let's say you're a hotel here in Thailand, it's going to be difficult. But using international law, the Thai government might be incentivized to actually fine you directly over here in order to make sure that the relations with the EU stays up to date. And also there's a whole concept of adequacy agreements in the GDPR, where if a country has secured what's called an adequacy agreement, it means that transfer of data from the EU to your country is free. You don't have to put in a lot of extra systems or controls in order to make that happen. So a good example in recent news is Japan. Japan and Korea both are working towards adequacy agreement with the EU. So it's similar to how you might have free trade between a country. This adequacy agreement is from a similar concept.
Maybe I could just add, for example, like I'm Singaporean American, I hold a Singapore passport. Everybody knows how great it is. It's easy for us to travel. And like entering into Thailand, I don't have to go through the queue, it's electronic. So that itself gives you an indication of what your government has, what relationship with each country. So usually through that, it can give you a very quick sensing of whether there's an adequacy agreement between these two countries. Because it has to do with free trade agreements. And GDPR will probably, right, don't take my words for it, in terms of a business perspective, they will probably come through and talk to them about, okay, how are we going to provide data So I would say foresee, if my vision is right, based on experience, with the next 3 to 5 years, because it only has been enacted, the GDPR compliance, right? So it will slowly be refined by industry base, because now it's very broad. Correct me if I'm wrong, and wide. So it will slowly be redefined by industry base. It will become more and more clear of each specific industry of what, how you should approach it. Okay, just thinking about that in Rob's perspective. So going back to your question and reinforcing it, if you look at your country's agreement in terms of free trade, is a good indication of how, most likely of how the approach would be with the government space. Now, for organizations that has already have a registered business in the EU, that's easy for them to reach you. But if you do not have, we have that conversation with a lot of Thai insurance companies, for example, right? And they're not quite sure. That's kind of a gray area. So it's difficult for them. And at the point right now, it's not their priority, right? In terms of the regulators, they are more prioritized in how the EU region itself, unless there's a breach. So for example, Singapore, Health, you heard about the massive breach. So if they have something, operations outside like a hospital, or government hospital, which is not, but you know, imagine that, then the GDPR regulators will be like, okay, there's a flag out there, and then they will come and ask what's going on. Yeah, so you have to think where your organization is.
Thanks.
All right, I'll let you continue.
Thank you. So, just for everyone's background, Joey is from Deloitte, and she handles the GDPR practice within Deloitte as well.
We work closely with OneTrust, yeah, solution providers.
Alright, so other than the fines, there are also other pieces that could occur from an enforcement perspective. With the very last one being potential claims on behalf of the data subject, where data subjects could actually have had proper impact from potential breach or lack of respect for their data, can actually file their own personal lawsuit as well, in addition to whatever fine that department. But again, it's not just about the fines, right? And the other question that a lot of companies that I talk to have is, these regulatory boards, do they actually have the budget and time to go after every single organization, right? And the short answer is no, they don't. But there's a lot of externally facing portions of the GDPR. Things like what kind of policies you have, what kind of cookie banners, what kind of consent mechanisms you have. So taking that into mind, data subjects themselves can be the one filing complaints. So you're not just worrying about the regulators coming knocking, you're worried about your data subjects. Some might be doing it maliciously, some might be doing it out of real concern, but they could be the ones that are enforcing that.
Can you maybe identify what data subject is? It's very technical term. I'm sure most people
Right.
don't know what.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that's important.
So data subject is basically that individual whose personal data you carry. Okay, so it could be your employees, could be yourself, could be your customers, potential customers, could be anybody. So remember the definition of personal data was any data that can identify an individual, either on its own or a combination of different data pieces coming together. So that person is a data subject. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So I think, just to reinforce, as an organization, you have to put a robust program for data privacy, as a lot of things has to do with cybersecurity, if you will. Even though in the regulation article itself, they don't put a lot of information because it's coming from a compliance auditor space, if you look at that. So there's very little guidance in terms of that. But to be compliable is you have to take very serious look in cybersecurity space, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So what we're saying, I lost my plot. Okay. So the data subject is essentially very difficult to manage, and you have to think in perspective of a very bad customer that doesn't get what they want, and what is the real threat they can put into your organization, and this could be abused, right? So what are your company policy, especially if you're in a servicing environment, that what are the robust kind of policy you have to put in place to address this? Because these will be your real immediate threats. The regulators are not, and the other immediate one would be cyber breaches and hackers. Okay.
The the other pieces that you need to consider about is not just about data subject complaints, but about reputational risk as well. But any sort of negative impact on your privacy could have direct impact on your bottom line as well. Okay, so that's the other piece. Now, organizations worldwide are reacting, and there's actually a lot of new jobs that are coming up. So the IAPP estimates about at least 75,000 DPOs are required worldwide. So what is DPO? DPO is Data Protection Officer. Okay. So what this means is you guys should all work towards becoming privacy champions within your organization, and these are all good career expansion opportunities for all of you as well. Okay. Now, I've mentioned to you guys the concept of accountability before. So accountability is about being able to prove your compliance to the privacy regulation. Now, what we say internally at One Choice is that accountability is death by 1,000 cuts, meaning it's very difficult and it's painful for any organization to actually be able to do this at a scalable level, right? So think of the amount of data subjects you need to work through. All the different data subject rights, so that each data subject has about 10 different rights that they can exercise within a company. Imagine if at least 100 of these people are reaching out to you. 100 is a very small amount, by the way. Reaching out and trying to make sure that you update the data, start processing the data, and you need to respond to all of these within 30 days. Regardless of whether you need to comply or not, you need to at least let them know. So there are a lot of certain exceptions on when you have to comply, when you don't have to comply, but you have to let them know you're not complying and why you're not complying. So an example here would be, I reach out to a company and tell them, I want you to delete my data. Okay, I don't want you to hold any personal data. But they have a legal obligation to keep my data for maybe 7 years. So they can choose not to comply with my request, but they have to let me know within 30 days. If they don't, I could file a complaint against them, and it goes down a whole slippery slope.
Can I have you add on?
Yes.
So example, if I'm a very bad EU customer and everybody goes on holidays, right? And you want to spend top dollar for holidays and you want to be treated nice, right? So let's say if I go to this resort in Thailand and it's a global operation, and I'm not happy and horrible Europeans, not saying sorry. Let's say I have very high expectations, you meet me and then things goes wrong, whatever, right? And I said that, you know what, I'm not going to come back anymore, you didn't service me well, I'm not happy. It happens all the time, right? So it just happened to be I'm an EU person, Asian EU person, whatever, we had things easier. And I said that, hey, okay, I know my right as a data subject. I'm lucky for the organization, okay? So I want you to prove to me that I want you to delete my data right now. Right. So what is your organization going to do? Even if for insurance, for example, right? I want to make a claim and for whatever reasons, we're not going to go into details, I'm not happy with it, or they're not able to provide me any information. At the front service desk, which is very important, are your front service desk trained to manage issues like that? Right, because like me, if I want to get what I want, I'm going to make it now. It's not going to be the private space. How do you manage that? I'm going to threaten you right away. How do you manage that itself? So if your EU clients know how to manipulate the GDPR rights as a data subject, that itself becomes a very difficult situation for you to manage. So the question is, how are you going to do that? So, and you know, social media these days are double-edged sword. That goes down to where the reputation is. Right, I can probably do a lot of massive damage just by posting in multiple. Right, we have this one little app that can clone my replies in 10 different places. So is your organization ready to attack that? You have to address it because the regulators, how do you think they're doing the sensing? They're doing web cloning, right? And that's the first phase. And that's how they streamline the sandwich industry. Just a little something to think about. Sorry, I want to steal your show.
No, I want this to be collaborative as well. And if you guys have any sort of input, please. This is a workshop, not a lecture.
So just throw in stuff like that, and then next time, you know, it will make it more informative.
Also, if you have any questions or statements you want to make in Thai, also feel free. I can help translate that as well. Okay. All right. So now, the fact that accountability is difficult to accomplish and to demonstrate, what this means is that a lot of organizations would have changed the way that they're operating. No longer do you need to consider what privacy audits as something you do every year. It has to be a continuous process. It has to be ingrained into your company culture. So that's why organizations need to be giving privacy training, privacy awareness throughout the organization. So all the way from the CEO to the janitors. Okay? So and the janitor is an important piece as well, because they're the ones that are emptying out your dustbin. If you're throwing personal data into the dustbin, that's potential data to think about. Right? So it's important. Now, if you're using Word and Excel for a lot of the risk impact assessments, all your kind of figuring out where your data is coming from, that works, but it's not automated. There's a lot of repetitive tasks that you need to keep doing over and over again. And there are tools out there, I'm not mentioning which ones, but there are tools out there that help you with that. Okay? So you need to really think about how your privacy program management is created and how it runs within the organization. Okay? So in terms of what's happened since GDPR has come into effect, within the first month, Ireland has about 547 breaches that have been notified to the data subjects, and about 386 complaints from data subject rights. Now, does it mean that just because the GDPR has come in, that more data breaches have occurred? I don't think so. I think it's more companies being more cautious about it. They're trying to over-report rather than under-report themselves. Okay. Similarly, the UK has a lot of complaints that have come in within the first month. France has a lot of complaints. So people are actually acting on this. Okay. Philippines is probably the closest privacy regulation to the GDPR in our region. So if you do have a huge presence in Philippines, this is something that you need to really, really worry about. Okay? And that's something you need to worry about today, not just in the future. If you do process personal data of Philippines citizens, also applies to you as well, because they have extrajudicial clauses within their Privacy Act. Now, what does this mean to companies around the world? Where is the privacy space heading to? Right, so the first piece here is that the records of processing. So within the GDPR, it forces companies of certain sizes to collect what's called a record of processing, meaning that you need to analyze every single business process within your organization to see where you're processing personal data. Where is that personal data coming from? Where is it being stored? Where is it being transferred to? What kind of security measures we have, both from a technical and organizational measure, to protect this personal data. This does not have to be only digital data. It could be physical files that you have that you're storing in file cabinets. So who has access to the keys to that file cabinet? Could be as simple as that. Okay. So what regulators are going to be doing is they're going to be using this record of processing and what's called privacy impact assessments, where you're analyzing what the potential risk of processing a particular piece of data is. These are reports that they're going to be using to regularly touch base with organizations to see what the compliance status is. So you need to have these reports easily printable, easily exportable. Okay, and it needs to be up to date as we move on towards our process. A lot of companies are going to enforce GDPR compliance. It might not be GDPR exactly, but basically privacy compliance for any sort of B2B deals that they're going to do. So I already see that within One Trust, where many organizations that we're trying to sell to, they want to see all the different paperwork to make sure that we are compliant with the GDPR as well, which we are, but otherwise we won't be selling the software.
It's tough when they're gonna come after you first.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you're holding everybody else's information.
Well, no,
So I mean, like, you know how they do it and stuff like that. It's an organization data subject. Never mind. Another day.
So we try to draw the fine line between controller and processor and try to stay in the processor side.
It's tough.
Okay, so another piece that these laws are introducing is the concept of breach notification. So if you get hacked, if there's some sort of data breach within your organization, you have 72 hours to notify your data subjects and uh, your regulators. So to give you context, Equifax, the credit rating agency in the US, it took about 4 months, I think, if I remember correctly, to notify the data subject. And because it takes time to kind of evaluate the potential impact of a breach. You need to figure out what kind of personal data is breached, how the data was stored, was it encrypted, was it pseudonymized, and there's a lot of information you need to compile very quickly within 72 hours. And that's a big task for a lot of organizations. Okay? You're going to keep seeing a lot of increase in data subject requests coming in. And the ePrivacy regulation is going to be very important moving forward as well. And this is actually the focus of our conversation today. Right? So I'm basically gone a whole different rabbit hole for a while. Okay? But the reason why I decided to kind of talk about ePrivacy regulation is because it has a huge impact on online marketing and advertising agencies. And I feel like that's how a lot of the companies in our region has that exposure to the GDPR in the first place. Yes, there are a lot of companies with actual presence there, but for the most part, you're exposed through your online presence. Okay. So again, coming back to that original point about the GDPR not being about fines, right? I feel like the UK regulator's statement is very important to understand because they said that their aim is to prevent harm, right? So they want to help companies comply. So if you're putting in the best efforts within your organization to comply, putting in the right mechanisms, hiring the right people, then they will work with you to get to that compliance. So the Philippines Privacy Commissioner said the same thing. Right? The Singaporean Privacy Commissioner also said the same thing. So I was at a conference 2 weeks ago where the Singaporean, Philippines, and Hong Kong Privacy Commission were all giving the speeches. And they all have the same effects where they actually give real-world examples of 3 different breaches that occurred and how the first 2 got fined, but the last one did not because they had all proper measures in place and still got breached anyway. Okay.
So it's not like you're a sport based on our effort.
Correct.
So as long as you can prove the effort,
Yeah.
right, and then you suffer a breach, then I'm not saying you'll be 100%, but then you're in better shape.
So the other piece I want to point out here is the fact that the GDPR is just a new precedent, like I said. A lot of countries around the world, all these green ones, have new privacy acts either already in force or in progress. Thailand also has one in progress as well. We will see when it comes to those.
You know when?
First question is when the elections are.
I think since we're all Thai organizations, the important thing is, should you wait for the Thai privacy law?
Great question.
Right,
Yeah.
so I'll give that to you.
No, please, I want to see what other people
Because
say.
you're representing this, so the question is, maybe let's just show our hands. How many of you think that we should be proactive? Or how many of you think that we should just wait for the guidelines to come out? What do you think? Show of hands if you think that you should wait for the guidelines to come out. Okay, 1. Come on, there's no right or wrong. Right, do you have gifts? No gifts, next time we bring gifts.
Because we will not get budgets from our company if there are no Thai guidelines. Yeah.
Okay, that's good, good point, good point.
Right,
yeah.
Right, and how many think that we should be more proactive because it's coming anyway? Okay, good. And maybe this organization probably know that it's going to be an impact on their business anyway. Right, so there's no right or wrong, but I think Guy and I we would say that if you know it's coming, it's better to be proactive because you don't want to be the organization that is calling us up.
Also keep in mind that right now it's cheaper. When the Thai Act comes in and you're coming last minute, of course the prices goes up.
That's a good point, that's a good point. I should put that into my plan.
Right?
Yeah, jokes aside.
Like,
Yes, so do you think that the level of awareness for Thai customers in general is it, I mean, not
Where we're at,
it's like we are a customer of the banks and then I just got a credit card and then every year constant form for the first many years.
right.
And then I said, I see that we cannot withdraw
banks, financial institutions, and insurance, because your record, and it's the organization right to keep your records, right? Because you can't have bad customers. I can't say I delete your records, and then you know the implications, right? And then how you're gonna get your financing and stuff, who you're gonna cross-check, right? So in terms of the law perspective for that industry, the data subject has no rights
Yeah.
to delete them. However, your organization, your role is to tell the client that I cannot delete, but I can pseudonymize it. So if there's a hack or anything, then it will be very difficult to identify it. So if you can provide that and that's a negotiation path, then it's less likely, unless it's a very unreasonable data subject, right? Then it's less likely that something else with that will happen. And the law will fall in your favor. You understand? From that perspective. So you have to think about pseudonymizations and anonymization, which approach you need to do because they're both very different. Okay, GDPR doesn't say that you have to use both, it's either or, right? Just to make the person less identifiable, unless you are like a top tier 1%, I mean, it's hard. Who you are, isn't it? Here, please continue.
So yeah, so overall awareness of privacy space in Thailand is not as advanced as we would hope it would be.
Yes.
Right? So like True got breached, and I didn't see much news about it. I learned about it through LinkedIn, not through newspaper. I don't read it much newspaper anymore. So
You
but
just need to subscribe to that notification, so I get high level information.
so the world's the world's awareness of privacy is increasing. So everyone would have heard about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica piece. So the world is trending towards that direction. Thailand is not there, but it will get there very, very soon. So reputational risk of privacy breaches is going to be a very real problem for everybody. So I don't like the argument about not having enough budget is there, but I think the reputational risk outweighs the cost involved in compliance. Okay.
Maybe later in time we can talk about reverse it, right? So what would be the impact of reputation risk? Because I think most of us may not have an idea of how intensive it is to deal with a reputation issue. Because it's also a business perspective as well. I mean, we have time for that.
That's actually a good whole different section for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll write down those.
So let's talk about the ePrivacy regulation, which is what I mentioned to you guys about how that is going to impact a lot of your advertising and online tracking pieces. Okay, so a lot of companies, they have a lot of revenue coming in through online tracking and online selling, especially the EU residents. So let's talk about some high-level terminology so everyone's on the same page. Does everyone know what a cookie is? Can anyone give me a guess? Cookies? And I'm not talking about the ones that you eat.
What is it used for?
So a cookie is a small text file that websites that you visit will install on your computer. Now, these cookies could have many different purposes. One of the most basic function of cookies, or one of the kind of cookies is session cookies, where let's say I'm talking to a website and the website has two servers, right? If I've started a session with one of the servers, the cookie will tell my computer which server to keep going to. So that, because in one particular session, let's say I'm purchasing something from an online website, if it starts going to between two different servers, it's not going to know everything about that information. So that information is going to get lost. So cookie, a session cookie will let your computer know which particular server to talk to make sure that your whole end-to-end communication occurs the same. Now similarly, these cookies could be used for other purposes. There are analytical cookies that website developers put in to record information on people visiting their website, to record what parts of the website that you actually look at, to help them optimize the way that a website works. Okay, you have targeting cookies. So, has anyone here ever had experience where you're looking, maybe you're booking a hotel on Agoda or something, and you go to some other website and suddenly the advertisement is all that same hotel, right? that uses cookies and other online tracking technology to make that happen. Okay, so there are other online tracking technologies out there. Now, examples of online tracking technologies is pixels. So some companies, rather than dropping cookies onto your website, they'll put a one-by-one pixel on the website where you won't be able to see with the naked eye. But by putting that pixel in there, you're able to then send information to whoever put that pixel in. So a big example of this is Facebook. They do that a lot. And if you're logged into Facebook and you go into a website that drops the Facebook pixel, they already know that you were in that particular website, and they can already start adding more information about who you are. Similarly with Google, if you log into a particular session in Google, and then you go through other things, not only do they know who they are, they know who you are too, right? So what you like, what you do. So there's actually an extension in Firefox called containers that you can start by, that you can automatically assign certain website domains to each container. So what I've done here is I've assigned Facebook into one container, Google into one container. So whenever I go into Facebook or Google, it signs it automatically. I'm still signed in, but those cookies and that information is not shared with other containers outside of that. So if you guys are concerned about this on an individual level, Firefox is a good browser for it. All right. Do not track. So do not track is a setting that you can place, you can configure on your website, where whenever you go to any sort of website, your browser will let your website know that you do not want to be tracked. Okay, so it's a simple checkbox on all modern browsers, but the problem with it is there's no standardized way to handle do not track, and many websites actually ignore them.
Can I ask you, so if I'm shopping, if I set up do not track, would it screw my shopping experience?
No, it won't. But most companies don't even look at it. So
I mean, it's just like savvy people like you and maybe I don't do that much because I could try to do a very difficult setting, and if I do shop online, I find out it's won't work and stuff like that. So it's pros and cons, but we're just highlighting what we can do or not.
like this is a technology that exists.
Yeah.
Now the last terminology that I want to clarify is the word consent. But before I give you the actual explanation, I want to ask what consent means to all of you here. Any examples? Or venture, I guess?
Give permission.
Okay, give
So by
permission.
knowing that what I give, I am responsible for.
Okay. Well, are you the data subject or are you the company?
I'm the data subject.
Okay. So what would you be responsible for when you say that?
That means if there's a breach, right,
Yeah.
from this cookie, because the cookies will always ask you the question when you click, right? That do you give consent?
Right.
So you have to click that, then only the page works. If you don't click onto that, the page doesn't work.
Okay, so the answer here was that with cookies, when you give consent, you're giving permission to use your personal data, right? And most websites have a cookie banner, and when you click accept, only then the page works, right? So you have elements here that are right, but there are elements here that I want to clarify here. Okay. So the element here that one thing that you said about when you press accept, only then the page works. So you're now talking about what's called an affirmative action. Okay. So in order for consent to be given, it has to be an affirmative action, where your data subjects are actually doing something to give that consent. So what this means is if you have a checkbox that's already pre-checked and someone has to uncheck it, that's not consent. Okay, so by pressing accept, you're doing an affirmative action. Now, the other piece that I didn't agree with in your answer was the fact that you cannot access the website without pressing accept. So one of the pieces of consent here is that it needs to be freely given. So if I go to a website and I choose not to accept cookies, I should still be able to access these services. Now, if these are cookies that are strictly necessary for your website to run, then by all means, we won't be able to turn them off, right? And then you should make it clear what functionalities are dependent on what cookie. So let's say you have one particular cookie that helps to run your chat functionality on your website. You know, when you go to some little help desk thing pops up, you can make it clear that if you don't accept XYZ cookies, this functionality won't go. That's fine. But not giving access to the entire website, that's not a freely given consent anymore. Okay? The other piece of a consent is it needs to be specific. So I cannot bundle one checkbox for many purposes. So let's say I'm on a website and there's a web form where I'm opting into email communications. Now there are many kinds of email communications out there. Account management about my account on the website, for newsletters, I don't know what else, right? Each of those needs to be separate checkboxes. So that users are opting into each individual option individually. Okay. The consent needs to be informed and unambiguous. What this means is I cannot hide this consent within a long document of legalese.
It's
Right.
not printed, yeah.
Yes. So it has to be really out there. People need to understand it in basic languages. So this also means that if you try to collect consent from people whose English is not their first language, you should give them an option to consent within their own languages as well. So having multilingual capabilities is crucial over here. Okay. Any questions about any of these terminologies? Okay. All right. So let's talk about drilling into consent again. There's three parts of consent. There's notice. When you go to a website, you're actually showing people a notice of what personal data you're collecting. So the basic information that you need to let them know about what personal data you're collecting, why you're collecting, what's your legal basis of processing it. So are you actually using my consent to process it, or are you using processing it because it's a legal obligation that you have to do already, for example. So if I open a bank account, you have to get my passport number or my ID number, otherwise you can't process it. Right? So it needs to be clear. There are many sort of strategies that you can do to make it clear. So, but there's two that I want to highlight. The first is just-in-time notices. So if you think about a web form, so I'm on a website, there's a form where you're asking them to fill in information. You could potentially have a hover link, like somewhere there, where for each field you're already telling them why you collect information. So why do you need to know my name? Why do you need to know where I'm located? So for example, I might be on a website, be on the OneTrust website, signing up for a demo request. So why do you need to know my name? So that I can actually address you by your name. Why do you need to know where I am? So I can route you to the right salesperson who can reach out and schedule your demo. Email address so we can communicate with you, right? So just in time notices at each field of the form would help with that, with this piece. There's the other piece where you can have layered notices. So you can have one notice that's really basic, really easy to read. And then if the data subject, if the person trying to read the notice wants to get into more details, then they can go into the more detailed version. So these are two strategies that I feel is useful, but it's also reinforced within the GDPR text as well. Okay. The other piece is that the way that you're collecting consent needs to be clear. So if you're talking about websites and we're talking about cookies, then you should have a proper banner. Remember that it needs to be freely given, so you can't take away access to your website just because they don't give you access to that. And then there's a big concept of withdrawal. So a big portion of consent is that consent needs to be as easy to give as it is to withdraw. Okay, so if I've given you consent electronically, I should be able to withdraw that consent electronically. You can't tell me to just mail you a physical snail mail, put stamps on. I don't even know how to buy stamps anymore. If I've given you consent over the phone, I should be able to remove the consent over the phone. Okay, so it has to be as easy to give and to take away. Now this method piece is also important, not just cookies, it's with anything you do within your organization. If you're collecting consent, if you're in a trade show, in a conference, like maybe you come here, in your sign-in sheet, I'm collecting your consent to reach out to you guys. That needs to be something that follows all of these pieces as well. Okay. Similarly, if you have a mobile app, now on a mobile, if you're on the browser on a mobile, there are cookies out there. But within a mobile app, there's no concept of cookies. But the concept of consent is still there. There's other ways to target you. If you guys play any mobile games lately, you'll see a lot of targeted advertisements coming through. So now users playing that game should be able to access the preferences and tell them that, no, I don't want any targeted advertisements. Most of the gaming companies do not have that. Should be possible, but again, I'm not a lawyer. I would let lawyers actually make that decision.
Even lawyers are tough, yeah.
Right.
We have that law even services for that stuff. The lawyers, they won't be able to do this.
Also, when you're creating the notice, you need to consider what kind of regulations that you need to fall under as well, because the kind of information that you need to provide might be different. Okay. You need to create preference settings so that users can opt in and opt out as easily. So remember that you need to be able to opt out as well, and having a preference center helps a lot with that. And then the rescanning piece that I mentioned. So in terms of when you're trying to list out the different cookies in your company, you need to start thinking about who manages each of these pieces. So especially if you're a huge multinational organization, you have many websites, there are potentially many owners of these different solutions. Now you need to also think about centralized versus decentralized. What this means is that will all the websites in your organization follow the same model? Or are you going to have specific consent models or specific notices depending on the region? Now, what I see many companies doing is they are adopting a decentralized model based on regulation. So if 10 websites fall under the same regulations, they all do the same thing. But the ones that fall under different regulations, they will have different centralized pieces. Make sense? So if you're managing more than one website, this is an important slide to think about. If you have only one website, then it's okay. Now, with notice consideration, I already mentioned language and clarity, but also the information that include might be slightly different. So things like what cookies you're processing, who's your processor for this information, who else are you transferring this information to. There's a whole list of items that you need to consider when you're writing these notices. Privacy lawyers are usually quite well versed with this, and there are free tools available online as well, especially for GDPR, to help you craft these policies. Okay. Now, I mentioned the preference centers. So this is an example of a preference center that you could create, where initially you have your privacy notice up on top, with a link to a more detailed notice inside. Then you divide up your cookies into different categories, whether these are strictly necessary cookies, performance cookies, targeting cookies, and then it's up to you on how detailed you want to go. So you would have a description on what each of these categories mean. Some companies leave it at that way and let you opt in and opt out. Some companies go into individual cookie levels as well. So the technology is out there to help you implement whatever model that you need to implement. Okay? There you go. I actually covered everything without realizing what I was reading. So here's an example of a random demo website that you usually use. There's a cookie banner on the bottom. And then it's telling you to understand your rights, that you're using cookies. And then on the right-hand side, there's a button for accept cookies. And then right next to it, tell me more, where you go into. If you press into that button, it goes into a preference center. Okay? So notice how the accept cookies button is actually a bright green here. The idea is to try to convince people, could be unconsciously, but to press that button. Okay? So that's where a lot of A/B testing, psychological pieces comes into play as well. Now, some companies have this banner up on top. Some companies will have it right in the middle, where the moment you come on your website, you see that banner. It's up to you on how you want to implement that. Some companies don't let you interact with any parts of your website until you interact with the banner. But again, don't forget that it needs to be freely given. So if you're doing that, I would suggest making sure that there's an X button that you can close out. So you're still interacting, but you're saying no, which is fine. Hillsong is an example that they actually modified this banner. Hillsong is a Christian music group globally. They're using our banner, and by default, our banner comes up with only an X. They actually modified the code to make the X say opt out. So it's very flexible on how you want it to do all work. So there's a preference center, as I mentioned. The other part that I also mentioned is the fact that you need to consider where your audience is located, right? And because that makes a big difference on what you can and cannot do. The e-commerce website in Hong Kong that I mentioned, they're using a reverse IP to figure out where the user is. If they're coming from the EU, cookie banner shows up with an opt-in. If they're coming from outside, it's notice only. Of course, people can still spoof that using VPNs, but the idea here is you're working with the best interests of your data subjects. Okay.
Can I just check with you something?
Go ahead.
For example, because most of us are global people, we move around. Sometimes we're in EU, sometimes we're not. So in terms of that, it's kind of good anyway, right? Because you're tracking the person. Because if you're an EU person and you are processing something outside the EU region, does the GDPR applies to me? So that itself is kind of a gray area.
Yes.
So I think with this approach, the organization don't have to rack their brains and think that whether this client is where, because I don't know. What's your perspective?
Well, so from our perspective, it comes down to your question earlier, saying you know that this is not in Thailand yet, but it's going to come soon. Might as well start complying, right? Because there's always going to be gray areas where if I've gone to the EU for a holiday and I'm still visiting your website, am I an EU resident there? Or
Yeah, let's say you're an EU resident,
yeah,
but then you originated from accessing the website from EU. Definitely that's covered.
right.
Then if you decided to do another transaction, but you're not sitting physically in EU region, is that covered? So that itself is the tough question,
Right.
which is gray. So what I'm trying to reinforce here is, if you take this approach, it makes your life easier as an organization because you're able to track and provide the right cookies. You don't have to tie down to one and have certain coverage of that.
Yeah.
So it gives you a bit more flexibility while you try to figure out
So
in terms of compliance or something.
the other piece that you need to also consider about, like you might not be actively targeting e-residents, but let's say again coming back to our shopping perspective, if you're offering prices in euros and offering prices in pounds, that could also be constituted as you targeting EU residents. Okay, so that's also another point to think about on how to avoid it. Now there were some, I think it was the LA Times. Their solution to fix the GDPR compliance was if you went through the website from an EU IP, it says sorry, we can't give you anything.
Yeah, that's right. They stop them right away to not process the deal.
I think that's overkill.
You lose a lot of sales in that way, yeah.
Well, they lose a lot of
I
sales,
know,
right?
yeah, exactly. But they're trying to be too careful, that's the issue.
Right. Now, like I said, compliance is not just you do it one time and that's all. You need to keep rescanning. You need to do that. And if you're doing it manually, that's going to be very difficult. I would suggest using one of the tools available, either the free versions or the paid versions, but don't do it manually. Okay? And also, the question that was asked earlier was on how do you keep a record of consent. Now, there are a few ways to do it. By default, a lot of solutions in the market, just the consent is stored on the user's computer, either as a first or third-party cookie. And that's all. But as people's interpretations of the law have improved, they actually want to store their consent in a back-end server somewhere. And there are technologies out there to help simplify that. Like at least for us, it's turnkey. You don't have to implement anything much. Put in one script, quite easy. But that's something to consider. And the other piece that you need to consider is how is your website created? Right? So what's your website infrastructure? Now, what kind of content management systems are you using? That's going to make an impact on what kind of cookie blocking methods you might be able to use. How are you dropping different cookies on your website? Are you just putting it directly into your HTML file, or are you using a tag manager? Does anyone know what a tag manager here is?
So technically, I think you need to
Yeah.
explain.
So, when I go to a website, and let's say the website wants to track my usage for advertisement perspective, they will be using a service, a very common service for this will be Google's DoubleClick. Okay, so DoubleClick is Google's advertisement agency piece that you'll see these cookies quite frequently on your computer, and it's using to help create personalization of yourself. Now, when you write your website, in order to drop this DoubleClick cookie, what developers do is they put in the Google script. Now, for a simple website, you might have one or two scripts. People put it directly into their own website. But as a company grows, they start having a lot of scripts to manage. Now, these scripts are called tags. Okay? So they'll have a lot of tags to manage. So they start using a tag manager to help manage all the different tags within your website. Where you might have 50, 100, it can get quite ridiculous on the number of tags that people have. So Google has a free tag manager that a lot of website developers use, but you can also have Adobe or any other features out there. Now the other piece that you need to consider is whether you are considered what's called a publisher. So a publisher is a company whose website you're selling advertisement space on your website to people. Now let me walk you through a bit of what happens when I go to a website that sells advertisement. And when I first learned about it, I was pretty amazed as well. There's a whole proper auction and bidding system that occurs. Similar to how when I go to, say, a museum to buy a painting and people say, I bid 100 baht, 500 baht. I think I'm going for really cheap paintings here. But people are bidding on how much they want to pay to show their advertisement to you. Okay, so there are a whole lot of ad tech vendors. Okay, so there are many different vendors out there that help companies sell their advertisements. So let's say OneTrust wants to make sure that people start seeing our advertisements out there. We would probably employ the services of an ad tech vendor. Now these ad tech vendors will bid for these systems through the advertisement servers and advertisement platforms that let you do that. So when I go to a website, what happens is the website collects as much information as they can about me. So my IP address, where I'm coming from, if I'm logged into the website, they'll know a bit more about who I am. So they collect as much information as they can and then pass to their advertisement server. And then the advertisement server then passes on to all these different ad tech vendors. And these people will then quickly analyze, okay, this is what we know about this person. How much are we willing to bid for an advertisement space? And then whoever bids the highest or the certain priorities, the certain, and so on. But someone wins the auction, and then that advertisement is delivered to your website. And all this happens within milliseconds. Okay, it's really fast. So with the GDPR, with the ePrivacy regulation, it became very confusing for companies, ad tech vendors especially, on how are they going to be able to deliver these advertisements and stay compliant with the laws. So what happened was the IEB, which is the advertisement bureau, they come up with a lot of advertisement industries standards and policies. They came up with what's called consent management framework, where they put in a middleman in between, which is a CFP. and anybody can register themselves as a CMP, provided they use these open source frameworks that have been created by the IAB. So now what happens is when I go to a website, I give my consent to different settings on what I'm willing to accept. I can also give settings on what vendors I'm willing to give my data to. So then that consent is then propagated to all these ad tech vendors who would then get this information before they bid for the advertisement space. They will actually see the consent string and they'll be able to figure out that whether they have been given consent to give a personalized ad or not. So for example, over here, 4 people have been given consent, so they would bid potentially higher because they can give a personalized advertisement space. But this poor person right here will have to just give a generic advertisement, so they will most likely bid at a lower rate. Now, if you are, again, a publisher, this is an important concept to consider because all these ad tech vendors out there are implementing this consent management framework. Okay, so Rapheepong marketing is a good example that a lot of companies use, and they are implementing this as well. So they will not bid any personalized ads unless the consent string has been given. So website developers will need to implement a CMP on their website to be able to make sure that this consent is passed on and propagated now to all the vendors that we have. So that was one piece that you needed to consider. But coming back again, you might have a lot of tag managers available as well that are being used to push in all these scripts onto your website. So you need to configure the settings of these tag managers to worry about the preferences that people are not putting in, so that you close that down the loop. Because just because I give preference here doesn't mean that the tag manager knows what I'm doing, right? So that's the other piece that you need to close down the loop. And then if you have any tags that you're defined directly on the website, you need to make sure that it reads the setting as well. So the reason why we have this slide is that if you notice a lot of websites, even if they give that illusion of consent, if you check the implementation of it, cookies are not being blocked. It's all an illusion. It's like going through airport security. You're not adding any value there, right? So any questions about the IAB framework? Alright. So then the other piece here was the consent records, where once people consent, you need to make sure that you have that record somewhere. So if there is any sort of dispute in the future, you can track it. Now, not every company is actually choosing to implement the consent records. Some companies are happy enough with the fact that they have this mechanism in place, it works, the information is stored on the user's device, good enough. Go ahead.
So maybe like what industry will most likely need?
This is not an industry specific,
Based
right?
on your experience.
So from my experience, the consent records for cookie compliance is only for the people that are really trying to take that extra step further from a cookie compliance perspective to comply. But these consent records, I see a lot of companies that are heavily involved in marketing and targeting. They're doing this for other purposes.
Private e-commerce?
E-commerce is a big one, right? So the reason being, they're really scared that people are going to say that I never consented and then go through a lawsuit. Whereas over here, if you have a record of it being consented, then you know exactly when it was given and what you were told at that time and all that information. But it's also important to remember that consent could be collected from many different locations, right? So let's say I'm an e-commerce website and you've just purchased a product from me, and at the end of your checkout process, you've opted in for marketing communications, for new deals that you might want to know about. Now, this consent could have been given on my website, could be given on my mobile website, or could be given from your mobile app. Okay, so it could be coming from 3 different locations. But maybe I called up the customer support team and given them consent on the phone. Maybe at the end of the conversation they asked me that. So it could be coming from many different locations. And you could have many different systems at that end that needs to know the latest consent status. So
which
yes,
means that organizations are challenged to try to consolidate a user
correct.
on based on where and how the consent was given. Because a lot of us have multiple, very tech savvy, we have multiple devices. Like for me, I work on my laptop, I have my iPad going on, I have my phone going on, depending on where the app is. If I have an issue, for example, like
Yes.
then it's important for the company to know how and where, right? To track.
Yes, correct. And also, it's important for all the systems. So you might have your CRM data. You might be using Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or something. They need to know the consent status. You might be using marketing automation solutions like Eloqua, Marketo, MailChimp, right? These people need to know the latest communication status. Now, if you're collecting it from one form that feeds directly to, say, Eloqua, the other systems don't know what's going on. So you need to
Like a
synchronize
centralized.
and have it all centralized.
Yeah.
So we do see a lot of consent records coming in for other purposes. For cookies, it's been there, but I see more people, less people implementing that, even though it's literally a checkbox that you enable and it counts it. Okay. You need to know audit trails. So when your privacy policy changes, when your cookie banner changes, you need to be able to have the trail so that, again, if there is sort of issues in the future, you know what kind of policy was presented when was this changed, so you can backtrack a bit if needed. And having a dashboard, managers and executive people love dashboards. I haven't quite fancy that. Alright, so to summarize, if you're trying to implement these pieces, you start off by scanning your website, categorizing them into different categories. You implement a cookie banner, whether you're on mobile or on your website, or if you're using a mobile app, you might be collecting these consent, not for cookies, but for other pieces. And you need to have, we have SDKs available to help you with that. Create preference centers, and then create a cookie policy that is automated. Okay. So that's pretty much a really high-level summary of the ePrivacy regulation and how that impacts a lot of companies that are doing marketing online. A bit of self-promotion from OneTrust perspective. We do have many other tools available in your journey towards compliance with the GDPR and privacy regulations. So we have tools with your internal privacy program where you might be doing risk assessments, impact assessments, data mapping exercises. If you find yourself using Excel for this, please take a step back and reconsider it because it's not scalable. We do have free versions available for all these tools as well. So if budget is really an issue, it's no longer an issue, right? There's a marketing and web compliance piece where with the cookie consent website scanning pieces that you can help. There's a universal consent piece for you to collect consent from many other locations. And the last piece is data subject rights management, where data subjects out there have about 10 different rights that they can exercise under the GDPR. Philippines DPA have other rights, Singapore PDPA have other rights. So we have a solution out there to help facilitate all the requests that's coming into your organization. Try to streamline that process and make sure that the communication with the data subject is clear. You're storing all that information so that if there is a dispute or someone comes knocking, you have all the communication both internally and externally in one place. So that's another piece and the reason why I'm focusing on this piece is because it goes hand in hand with all the marketing and web compliance. Companies, especially outside the EU region, they feel like they need to clear up the front of their house, make the front of their house look clean before they clean up inside. Some other companies might start cleaning inside. It depends on your company's direction that you want to implement. But if you focus on cleaning the front of the house, the website scanning consent and data subject rights is the first pieces that you would actually think about. Okay? And remember that privacy is not a fad that's just there right now. It's here to stay. So just like back in the day we had cars and there was no seat belt, no airbags, it kind of limited on how fast you can go on the road because of safety reasons. Similarly, with big data out there, there's a lot of potential for organizations to harness that big data, make real value out of the data. But without proper mechanisms out there, seat belts, airbags, the speed at which you can accelerate your organization is going to be limited. Last piece here is we do have a Privacy Connect event. Privacy Connect event is we bring in privacy practitioners from different organizations. We're bringing them into different workshops around the world. We are organizing about 50 workshops between now and December. In Asia Pacific, we have these cities in green. Okay. The first one is in Sydney next week, next Wednesday, and then Singapore is August 30th. In case you guys want to join,
Any specials for those that are here?
we will be. If you do join, I will throw in free One Trust training. Okay. The other piece here is that this is news that just released yesterday that we have a global user conference coming up. So these are people who are with Privacy Connect, we're trying to keep it solution agnostic, trying to keep it general. Okay. But with Privacy 10, it's going to be actual One Trust users out there who are coming, talking about what they do, and it's going to be action-packed. I will not be going, unfortunately, but something else that you guys might want to consider. Any questions? Was this kind of in line with what you guys were hoping to hear? Was it a useful session?
Scary.
So this was just a small piece of the puzzle, right? So I do have other presentations and stuff that we do regularly in these conferences. And a big one that I feel like is also useful in the future, which I'll try to set up either here or somewhere, is on privacy impact assessments, data mapping, and why you should be doing that. All right, so thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Chairman, for organizing this.